Hi, welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Today I'd like to continue talking about U.S. pop culture in the year 1985, concentrating on the middle of the year, May through August. And I'd like to kick off talking about May with an update on our old friends, the Beach Boys. In May of 1985, Brian Wilson played his second ever live solo set. It was another benefit. He played a benefit in March of the year. This one was for the Malibu Emergency Room. And he performed the same three songs he had performed at that earlier gig. He did Da Do Run Run, Sloop John B., California Girls. Also at this performance he introduced I'm So Lonely from the upcoming Beach Boys album and Male Ego, which would be on the CD version of the album and also released as a B-side. Brian was reportedly much more relaxed and much more engaged at this performance, and apparently it went a long way toward making people think that Brian was really coming back in a way that had seemed impossible only a short time earlier. Meanwhile, as always in 1985, there was plenty of action on the record charts. Tears for Fears album, Songs from the Big Chair, had been released the prior February. It had taken a while to catch on, but by May it was in the top 10. It would spend 4 weeks at number 1 in July of 1985 and spawn 2 number 1 hits, Everybody Wants to Rule the World and Shout, and in the fall there would be a number 5 hit from the album with Head Over Heels. The Eurythmics' new album, Be Yourself Tonight, was heading up the charts based on its hit single, Would I Lie to You, which would eventually go to number 5. And The Power Station, which was of course comprised of Andy and John Taylor from Duran Duran, Robert Palmer, and Tony Thompson from Chic, were climbing the charts with their debut release. The album would eventually hit the top 10 in June and would peak at number 6 in July. It contained 2 major hits, a cover version of T-Rex's Bang a Gong and Some Like It Hot. Incidentally, I always got a kick out of the rhyming scheme in that song where they rhyme Some Like It Hot with Some Like It Hot. June brought many more big album releases for the summer, including Sting from The Police's first solo album. We thought the release and success of this solo album might spell the end of the Police as we knew them, and as it turned out, it most certainly did. Pretentious album, but still a really good album, and what wasn't pretentious in the 80s. And June 10th brought the release of the long-awaited, by Beach Boy fans anyway, Beach Boy album, a self-titled album now popularly known as Beach Boys 85. We will, of course, discuss this track by track in detail in an episode coming up very shortly. For comparison, also released on that day was REM's Fables of the Reconstruction, Bob Dylan's troubled Empire Burlesque album, and Little Creatures by the Talking Heads. So this didn't produce any major hits, and She Was, Stay Up Late, and Road to Nowhere all got a lot of radio play during the summer of 1985. Hit singles in the spring and early summer of 1985 included One Night in Bangkok from the musical Chess by Murray Head, who had had a hit with Superstar from Jesus Christ Superstar way back in 1971. Things Can Only Get Better by Howard Jones. In My House by the Mary Jane Girls. Walkin' on Sunshine by Katrina and the Waves, and You Spin Me Round Like a Record, in parentheses, by Glam Pirates, Dead or Alive. And in the theater we had Rambo, First Blood Part 2. It's been a while since I've seen it, so correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection is, though it was set in Vietnam, owing to changes in the geopolitical landscape, Rambo's primary adversaries were Soviet Russians. And also, as I recall from the movie, Soviet Russians are terrible soldiers. Their response to any threat is to run around at random, firing off into the air like somebody kicked an anthill. And Rambo could just stand up on a rock in full view of everybody and just mow them down at will. Also big that early summer was The Goonies, with the soundtrack that featured Cyndi Lauper's hit, Goonies Are Good Enough. And Bond was back in View to a Kill, again with a soundtrack hit, this time Duran Duran performing the title track. Do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to sell Duran Duran records. And also there was Ron Howard's sci-fi fantasy, Cocoon. The Beach Boys played a few live shows in May and then began touring in earnest in June, which continued on through the middle of November. Brian was apparently only present at the high-profile dates like the 4th of July and Live Aid, otherwise he was absent. They did in July begin incorporating some of the tracks from their new album into their sets, including Get You Back, California Calling, Crack at Your Love, It's Getting Late, and She Believes in Love Again were played in at least some of the live sets during that summer. And of course, July 4th now had become a big Beach Boy event. This time they actually played two shows, one at the Art Museum in Philadelphia in the afternoon, then they flew to Washington to play an evening show at which Brian was present. He wasn't there for the afternoon show, apparently he was there for the evening show. They had numerous guest stars, including Mr. T, New Edition, the Oak Ridge Boys, Christopher Cross, Jimmy Page, and in one of his earliest appearances with the group, John Stamos on drums. Two of the performances from these concerts, Come Go With Me with the Oak Ridge Boys and Barbara Ann with Jimmy Page, were released the next year, 1986, on the Mike Love Foundation charity album, 4th of July. And contrary to what it indicates on the back of the album, Back in the USSR with Ringo Starr and Surfer Girl with Julio Iglesias were actually recorded at the 1984 4th of July shows. We'll talk more about this album at some point in the future. Also, according to the Beach Boys in Concert book, both shows were apparently taped for a TV special called Bring on the Summer with the Beach Boys, which I don't think was ever aired. I don't think it was ever seen the light of day. But please let me know if I am wrong about that. Let me know if you've seen it, if it's available. I'd love to know whatever became of that. That's the only place that I recall having seen it mentioned. There were, of course, more big summer blockbuster releases in July of 1985, including St. Elmo's Fire, which, like so many other films during this period, had a hit single from the soundtrack, this time the #1 St. Elmo's Fire, in parentheses, Man in Motion by John Parr. Also, there was Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome with its #2 hit, We Don't Need Another Hero, Thunderdome, in parentheses, by Tina Turner. And finally, there was probably the blockbuster movie of the year, Back to the Future, starring Michael J. Fox from Family Ties and Christopher Lloyd from Taxi. It, of course, had its big soundtrack hit, The Power of Love by Huey Lewis and the News, which reached the #1 spot on the charts on August 24th, 1985. Of course, the musical event of the year took place on July 13th, when the Live Aid concerts were performed at Wembley Arena in the UK and JFK Stadium in Philadelphia. They featured an almost unbelievable array of talent. It's kind of amazing to this day how many great acts, practically everybody that was active in 1985, appeared at either Wembley or JFK Stadium that day. And of course, the Beach Boys were there at JFK Stadium with Brian. They performed a 5-song set kind of early in the day, around 12:40 in the afternoon. The set consisted of California Girls, Help Me Rhonda, Wouldn't It Be Nice, Good Vibrations, and Surfin' USA. The Beach Boys set followed Canada's Bryan Adams and preceded George Thorogood and the Destroyers at JFK Stadium. And apparently earlier in the day, the Beach Boys had provided backing vocals to REO's Speedwagon on Roll with the Changes. Let me show you the Beach Boys pages of the commemorative booklet here. Some of the acts only get one page. The Beach Boys at least get two. You've got Alan, Mike, and Brian on stage. You've got a black and white of Brian. You've got Bruce and Jeffrey Foskett down here. And down below, there's this little blurb, they sound just the same, which to me seems like faint praise from somebody that really didn't know too much about the Beach Boys, but needed to fill in a little bit of text to complete the commemorative book. That Live Aid Day also saw the premiere of the video for Mick Jagger and David Bowie's Live Aid charity single, a cover of Martha and the Vandellas' Dancin' in the Street, which would eventually go to #7 on the charts that September. Also coming up high in the album charts in July was 7 Wishes by Night Ranger, Invasion of Your Privacy by Rat, Theater of Pain by Motley Crue, and Brothers in Arms by Dire Straits, propelled mainly by its big hit single Money for Nothing, which featured vocals by Sting and a distinctive animated video that received heavy airplay on MTV. Money for Nothing would eventually hit the #1 spot in September. Also doing well was Aretha Franklin's new album, Who's Zoomin' Who, with the hit Freeway of Love, which would go to #3, and the title track itself would go to #7 beginning in the fall. Also in July, Coca-Cola announced that there would henceforth be 2 types of regular Coca-Cola, the new Coke, which had been introduced earlier in the year, and the return of the original Coke as Coca-Cola Classic. I'm still not sure all these years later whether New Coke was a blunder and a disaster or some kind of genius Machiavellian marketing ploy, but either way, Coca-Cola got a whole lot of publicity that summer, and we ended up with a choice of 2 different types of regular Coke. Moving into August, there were new movie releases. Michael J. Fox had a second big feature with Teen Wolf, and the memorable and hilarious Pee-wee's Big Adventure was released in August of the year. Also returning after running for just 1 month earlier in the year was a new TV series called Moonlighting, starring Bruce Willis and Sybil Shepherd, which would soon become a huge hit. If you were a hipster in August of 1985, you might have been listening to the Head on the Door album from The Cure, or Rum, Sodomy and the Lash by Irish folk punk rock band The Pogues, or Steve McQueen from Prefab Sprout, which was released in America as Two Wheels Good in order to avoid a potential lawsuit. More mainstream albums coming up the charts included John Mellencamp's Scarecrow album, and flying in the face of convention, Billy Joel released a 2-volume greatest hits set in August rather than at Christmas time. It didn't seem to hurt as the double set eventually went to number 6 on the charts. Heart was making something of an unexpected comeback with their self-titled album featuring the hits What About Love and Never. It would continue to produce hits well into 1986 with the number 1 These Dreams and the number 10 Nothing at All. Also, Whitney Houston was beginning her massive chart run with her first hit, You Give Good Love, which would eventually go to number 3 and presaged a more over-the-top, bombastic vocal style that would become very prevalent in the late 80s. And also, to conclude with some Beach Boys news, somewhere in the second half of 1985, we got the release of David Leaf's updated and expanded version of his 1978 book, The Beach Boys and the California Myth, this updated version simply titled The Beach Boys. It was a treasure trove of information with lots of photographs, really an extensive and scholarly look at the Beach Boys' work, and a great thing. David Leaf certainly had an editorial viewpoint in this book. He was urging basically that Brian Wilson should move away from the Beach Boys and make a solo album. 3 years later, we saw how that played out. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed this. Hope you found it interesting. Next time we'll talk about the Beach Boys' 1985 album in depth with a track-by-track review of the thing. Hope you found this interesting, though. I really enjoyed putting this together. Please like and subscribe, and I'd love to hear your comments. Love to hear how you like this sort of a format where we go over parts of the year. Also, let me know if you'd like to hear the last third of 1985. A lot of stuff happened in September through December that was very different in flavor from what came earlier in the year and really what came in 1986. I'd love to put that together sometime. There wouldn't be that much Beach Boys stuff in it, I don't think. I mean, they were still touring, but don't think there's that much to talk about Beach Boys wise, but certainly a lot to talk about pop culturally during the last third of 1985. Again, really appreciate you watching. Hope to see you next time. Thanks and goodbye.